Welcome back to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. Mythosophia, delving into mythology, and we're talking today about Star Trek and the Borg and that whole mythological aspect. But before we jump back into our conversation that we're going to get into with our guest today, I want to let you know about the roundtables that are coming up. And I have to say, Will, that that was a lot of fun when we went back, and I think it was March, to the roundtable that was held there.
Yeah, with Saffron.
Under the
Teaching
tree. What a marvelous tree. Anyway, June 29th, 5:30 p.m., Arthur George will be presenting a story. He'll be on mythology of Eden, which was similar to the conversation we had with Zaman Stanazai.
Zaman Stanazai.
Stanazai, beg your pardon. Sorry, Zaman. Anyway, talking about the mythology of Eden, and that'll be a conversation that'll be held on the 29th of June, 5:30 p.m., again, Arthur George. And then a reminder that you can also find out more information about the roundtables at mythosophia.org, where you can also hear recordings as well as videos of these programs as we progress through 2014. And we're going to jump right back into our conversation, introducing our guest for this program. And we're going to go in a little different direction to start with, but we're going to swing right on back in just a couple of moments. Will, why don't you introduce our guest for today?
So Glenn Slater, for the last 12 years, has taught Jungian and archetypal psychology at the Pacifica Graduate Institute. His academic background includes degrees in religious studies and clinical psychology. He edited and introduced Volume 3 of James Hillman's uniform edition of writings, Cynics and Puer, and he co-edited Varieties of Mythic Experience, Essays on Religion, Psyche, and Culture, with Dennis Slattery, who was actually our first guest. And Glenn has also written a number of articles for Jungian journals and has served for many years as the film review editor at Spring Journal. And he's also has a background in clinical therapy. So his areas of emphasis include Jungian psychology, archetypal psychology, psychology of religion, technology and psyche, and cinema and psyche. Welcome to the
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I do have to say, Glenn, that the subject of religion and psychology would interest me greatly. We'll have to do a whole separate program on that one.
I would love that. I love talking about fundamentalism and what's going on in the culture with religion.
And how it hasn't really changed much in over 1,000 years or more.
Well, on the surface, it seems that way.
Well, let's jump into our conversation here. I think this is very interesting stuff.
I think that there is a curse for some of the wisest people around getting asked some of the most obnoxiously simple and straightforward questions because they're the best people to answer them. So poor Dennis got asked the question, what is mythology? And I'm going to ask you, what is an archetype?
What is an archetype? Well, you know, that term, Carl Jung was primarily responsible for bringing that into the vernacular. And it came out of his observation, looking at people in pretty extreme psychotic states, that these mythological motifs kept coming up. And so pretty soon he was doing cross-cultural studies, and that there were these universal themes that would come out. For example, probably most well known is what Joseph Campbell did around the hero. The hero has 1,000 faces. And then if you go into particularly differentiated mythologies like Greek mythology, you find trickster figures, you find themes like sacrifice, you find ideas, moments like crossing the threshold and so forth. And these things turn up in all kinds of cultures. So an archetype is best thought of as a universal. It's a way in which our psyches are patterned that goes beyond the culturally specific to something much deeper in the human condition.
So the images and experiences, ideas that recur from everything from dreams to a myth to art to, in conversation with a psychologist, there are these images and we're calling them archetypes that so consistently recur across so many different ranges of human experience that he was led to look for universals. And that leads into James Hillman has made a big twist from this conversation about archetypes as though they are singular universals, nouns even, to want to describe, to want to focus on the adjectival side, to the archetypal. Why is he doing that?
Well, Jung made this distinction between important between what he called the archetypal image and the archetype in itself, the archetype per se, because Jung's idea of archetypes was that they were the form, they were the underlying structure, as if the mind has a proclivity to think and imagine in particular ways, and then the images are filled out through culturally specific and, in the case of the individual, personally specific material. So that's an important distinction because a lot of people think Jung was arguing we inherit these specific ideas, and that's not the case at all. What we inherit is the propensity to construct our thinking in particular ways. And one of the aspects that Jung attributed to archetypes was they had a sort of energy to them. So
they're not just kind of vestiges of random forgotten memories.
No, they spark imagination. They pull you in. They have this charge. And so when James Hillman came along, he thought, it's not so much about categorizing things, categorizing the content of experience into archetypal forms, but listening to that bass note, if you will, that archetypal quality, that feeling of universality that seems to be present in a poem, a work of art. So even if you can't explicitly tie something to a mythological or religious motif, you can feel that universality coming through what is very often extraordinarily unique and specific experience.
Thank you for that answer. It's actually, I think that's one of the most important distinctions, because I talk to people about archetypes all the time because it's the background of my studies too, and there's a lot of hesitance and hesitation around putting a capital letter in front of some archetype, because then there's this argument of, well, what is the mother, or what is Oedipus, or all these things. But then when you get into the adjectival way of talking about it, it's hard to deny just the sheer presence of the sense of a recurring pattern or of a shared experience because of a common pattern. And I think that's so much more powerful and a more important way to think about it.
Yeah, it's the question of is this an archetype or not? Is a fairly flawed question. It's a problematic question, whereas the qualitative term archetypal points to the feeling of universality, the way the imagination opens up around an experience or an image. So
maybe the most famous archetype is kind of funnily Freud's Oedipus character, or Oedipus archetype, we might call it that, but he talks about an Oedipus complex. So he looks at a whole psychological complex around an archetypal character. What do psychological complexes have to do with archetypes in our psyche?
Jung had the insight that our complexes, which I think is a term that most people pretty well relate to these days, particularly the typical inferiority mother-father complexes we talk about. But Jung had the insight that all complexes are built around some kind of archetypal pattern. And I think the way to grasp that is to say we develop complexes around what's important in life, those aspects of life that have a lot of psychic energy attached to them. And that's why Freud, before Jung, went to mythology in order to try to discuss a key complex that turns up in people's individual lives.
So what does this mean for myth-making and storytelling? To come across this insight, to realize this insight, the relationship of a complex and an archetype and an archetypal character, how does this translate into mythic arcs, or character arcs in a myth and storytelling?
Well, I think stories, just to put it succinctly, are archetypally structured. And if they were not, they would not be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if the very definition of or what makes something meaningful has to do with its archetypal background.
Mm-hmm.
And what a story does, if you think about it, is try to put, for example, our own lives or the actions of a particular character into a more holistic context.
Mm-hmm.
And there are typical moments when we construct a story. For example, just the three-act model of storytelling. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's an opening, there's complications, there's initiations, and downturns. And the story, in a way, parallels the process of psychological development.
Mm-hmm.
And the common tissue there would be these archetypal patterns.
So it's almost like there's a lock and key between an archetypal character and what they might need to go through to resolve the complex around that archetype.
That's a very interesting way to put it, because when we start naming these archetypes, you know, the mother, the father, the wise old man, and so forth, we end up with a very static idea.
Mm-hmm.
But really, an archetype is better thought about as a field.
Mm-hmm.
And when that field is constellated, certain things need to take place.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to develop psychologically, for example, Jung understood that we have to confront the shadow side of things.
Mm-hmm.
You can't develop unless you're prepared to go to the negative side, to the things that we don't want to look at.
Uh-huh.
So that shadow moment or process is archetypal.
Well, let me take that as a good opportunity to transition, because what we're really here to talk about is the Borg. And so you're talking about the necessity of being willing to go into the shadow to grow and to go into some things that are dangerous and maybe some things that are even problematic as part of the growth process. Well, we as a species are now confronting some serious options about human hybridization, turning ourselves into part machines. My dad's got an artificial hip. Is he already a cyborg? But there are a lot of questions about maybe there's some darkness, especially when you think about the Borg, because the Borg actually present this whole idea in a dark light. But is that necessary? Is that worthwhile? Whether it's scary or not, is this something that we've just got to do?
I think it's essential.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's critical that our imaginations can go to the future, as it were, and explore these possible futures.
Mm-hmm.
And as happens in the Star Trek series, a lot of those images are very dark. There's the possibility of destruction. So being able to look at those images, digest them, reflect on them, turn them around, I think what that does is it allows us to look very closely at what's going on in the present,
mm-hmm.
to become more conscious of already exists in our propensity to move in this direction or that direction. And so I'm very interested in any kind of image of human-machine hybridization, because that trend in the culture is already afoot.
Mm-hmm.
So then your position would be, because I pose this question when a lot of these biological things come up, with these medical advancements and so forth, that this is the question that I put to people. Just because we can, does that mean we should? And so I'm hearing you say yes.
No.
Okay.
All right, desimplify.
Please.
The way I think about it is that these technological advancements all present us present all of us with a series of slippery slopes. And the slippery slope with medical technology is between restoring functionality and enhancement. Mm-hmm. And I think we're already in some areas like plastic surgery and so forth. We're already crossing that line from just something that is restoring original appearance and then moving towards an image of one kind or another, some sort of perfected form. But that is also going to start creeping into other kinds of implants and so forth. For example, if you're going to get a robotic limb, the point's going to come where they'll be able to make an arm that is stronger. Maybe the hand can turn 360 degrees or something.
You got a guy competing in the Olympics with fake legs.
Fake legs. And so the issues that come up around these things actually bring us back to reflect on what it is that makes us essentially human, what seems important to preserve in our humanity. So that's my interest is in looking at the trend and asking ourselves those particular questions. So I don't necessarily think I think it's inevitable that we're on this track towards technological improvement, but where we start to distinguish and draw lines is what will be critical.
Yeah, I've always thought that the most important aspect of that is not just about the line, but who gets to draw the line,
right,
and where will the line be drawn. And
right.
It isn't just where the line is drawn. It's, okay, who made that decision? Who decided that that's as far as we're going to go and we will go no further?
Right.
Well, it becomes, to me, it's going to come down to a question of what we value.
Yeah.
And what we value is tied up in how we story our existence. What is the purpose of human existence?
And to that, also, I've posed this question, and primarily it was to a gentleman I had on. He's a philosophy professor, and my question to him, and I kind of put this to you as well, is it really necessary? And again, when I have to preface this question by saying I am not talking about annihilating the human race. I am talking about stopping the procreation of the human race. Is it really necessary for the human race to continue on into the next century and the next century and the next century? And why? Or why not?
Well, the only way to respond to that is to say from who or what's perspective.
What has the human race actually accomplished?
Well, that's not a question of progress at all, and that's kind of the issue.
Well, I have heard the idea from various sources that perhaps technology is a kind of cunning virus on the part of Gaia to rid itself of humanity. So perhaps from the perspective of Gaia, the Earth itself, humanity is a problem, and that we're not so essential to the big picture. But it seems to me that this experiment of humanity and the culture, the incredible artistic, imaginative, creative output of the human culture is something extraordinary, and it's very hard to imagine making decisions, as a lot of people seem to be now making in AI, robotics, nanotechnology, making decisions that actually open the door to our species being passed over.
Advanced or something.
Well, advanced, but then the question into what? And I suppose that's what we've got to try to get at.
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to say real quick, just because you had a great quote, about playing with nature, and there's this. I love the only thing we will tamper. I think Mother wants us. Is Gaia trying to get us off? Is there some other side that actually appreciates and enjoys that we're playing, that we're doing this stuff, that we're stretching.
And it also raises that question that I brought to you in our first segment, Will, in terms of I really have a problem with watching documentaries about the history of man, and they will point to a specific point in time, and they will say, and this changed the course of history, as if they knew what the course was that it changed from.
Yeah.
And going to, it's like, really? So now it's like, okay, so maybe this is the course that man is to take to, I don't know what, weed out the population a little bit,
God knows.
thin it out, what have you. Yeah, exactly.
But we do see real problems where we do see that cutting our population in half is as scary as the reality that could call that forth would be. We also see a reality where overpopulation could could also be our destruction. It's
and in a manner of speaking, if you go over the top as far as population, we all could be annihilated. Whereas technology taking out half, well, at least half of us get to stay. Now, whether you're on the half that gets to stay and half that goes,
these fantasies of stepping outside of ourselves. Right. So we're looking at it not from a kind of anthropocentric perspective. I think are very, very important because again, what they do is they bring us back to becoming more conscious.
Yeah.
But there is a real important distinction to make between working with nature and controlling and manipulating nature and imposing our will and desire onto nature. And that's one of the difficulties that I'm finding as I get into the literature on AI and robotics and some of these singularity theorists, for example, is that they feel as though they can improve the human condition, re-engineer the human being along the lines of what they think is going to make our lives better, more intelligent, etc.
Well, let me ask. So a lot of people think that the line is implants. I don't want an implant. That's like some conceptual line of how far the hybridization should go. But what is more invasive to what it is to be human, an implant or getting rid of death, like Transcendence wants to do in Singularity? Like, what changes what it is to be human more? It's not necessarily going to be an implant. There may be ways that technology change so much what it is to experience as a human that they may change. They may be far more invasive in the human experience than even some kind of cyborgian implant.
And I have an implant. It's a lens implant. I mean, that's all. I have a fake tooth. Okay, it's the equivalent of an implant.
Yes.
The real one is gone. I used to be able to say I had all my original parts, and I can't say that anymore.
Well, here's a question too. So what is? Do we identify with our physiological and biological selves, or behaviorally? Because we're already behavioral cyborgs.
Right.
We're already just as integrated.
Here's the thing. There's a difference between the actuality and everything we've mentioned so far is about restoring functionality, and the realization that the body is not simply a robotic extension of the mind. So a lot of what we seem to be dealing with in this world that's headed towards human-machine hybridization is a way of thinking about the body in very Cartesian terms, as something that is an appendage to what really makes us human.
And consciousness is completely separate from
that.
Yeah.
But the traditions of phenomenology and depth psychology that I come from tell us that the body is absolutely essential to the psyche. And the way I would put it is that no body, no soul, no flesh, no soul. So if you start down the track of fully manipulating the body, just seeing it as a piece of clay we can do what we want with, we're going to be changing the psyche.
And the soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Let us delve back into our conversation about the mythology, as I've shared with Will and, of course, our listeners many, many times, about a conversation a good friend of mine and I had back in the 90s during the heyday of Next Generation. And he said that was our modern-day mythology. So I started viewing the series and the individual shows differently, and I could see that there was a sort of a moral to the story in each episode, even those that were very lighthearted. It was like every once in a while they'd throw in one of these almost frivolous programs. And you had to get past the frivolity in order to kind of find the hidden meaning and message. I always found that fascinating. But we're going to take a pause here. We're going to take a listen to one of the main characters, if you will, who those who have followed the series know, and that is Locutus.
I am Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is over. From this time forward, you will service us.
Mr. Worf. Fire.
And, of course, resistance is futile when you're listening to this program, because once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. And that was one of the things that I found so interesting about this television series, the movies, and all the stories that Gene Roddenberry had created. I mean, just a phenomenal mind. But there was, and I'm going to take a little sidebar here. If you've ever looked at the original Starship Enterprise, dead on from the front, looking at the bow, the next time you get a picture, an image of the Tree of Life, the Kabbalah, notice the similarity in the two nacelles, the shape of the main the main thing, and the struts, and so on and so forth. And I'm going, he had to have been influenced somehow by that, whether it be consciously or otherwise. I mean, I saw that when I first saw the Tree of Life many years ago. I'm going, Star Trek, you know? But that's kind of what the series and that concept, that vision that he had, Gene Roddenberry had, in terms of really wanting a better life for humanity. Obviously, he answers the question that I pose, is it really necessary for man to continue? Yes, from his perspective. But when he throws in these characters that, on the face, when you first see the series, the Borg is going to win. I mean, that was the foregone conclusion.
Unstoppable force.
Star Trek's coming to an end, and the Borg is going to take over with a spin-off, you know? And yet they managed to find a way to defeat this seemingly undefeatable foe.
Yes.
Mythology in general is kind of like that, though. You're placed in those kind of scenarios with the storytelling where you come up, whether even in Robert Bly's Iron John, where it talks about man reaching his lowest place in life, the catabasis, I believe it is, and all you can do is look up.
Yes.
You know, and then you start working your way up. That's kind of what these stories are all about, in a manner of speaking, overcoming great odds.
Yes, taking us to the most ultimate challenge, and that is what makes a great story. That's what we go to the movies to see, is people being placed in extreme situations, and we want to see how they handle them, and we want to vicariously identify with that. And what, to me, is compelling about the Star Trek series is that it's if it's been able to render a sort of metaphorical picture of the challenges that we face collectively today. You know, we've passed the time now where nature can intervene in our trajectory. We've gotten to the point where we have so much control over the planet. And that means that it comes down to our consciousness, our values, our ethical, sense of responsibility. And the Star Trek universe shows, first of all, a technology that's exploding at an exponential rate, and then these encounters with other peoples that can, abduct us into a different way of life, change our value system. And so to me, the Star Trek world is all about how do you preserve the sense of humanity, even what is it that makes us essentially human in the face of these challenges. And so it holds a mirror up to where we are right now.
Well, they're really good in Star Trek. I really love that they do this. Even though they're pushing us forward in time, they really go back to the past a lot, to old books, to old stories. And so as Dennis was talking about when he came on for the first episode, was talking about founding myths. And when you're starting a new mythos and you're starting a new reality, well, I would say Star Trek is very much a founding myth. It starts a whole kind of I mean, not that it's the first sci-fi, but
Sure.
And so, but what it did so well in that context was looking forward while constantly drawing from what was behind, constantly
past, yeah.
not giving up on the past.
Right.
And I think that when you move forward with technology, you find some people talking about technology that are really kind of like where they want to move past the past, where when they weren't as smart as we were today, they were dumb. And there's this move forward. But what's brilliant about Star Trek is they're constantly throwing their fishhooks behind the ship.
And that's what really makes soul in we think about that word and its kind of qualitative connotations, the being able to look back and look forward at the same time. Because when you look back, what you see is the archetypal world. The things from the past that we still value, return to the literature, the traditions, and so forth. That's where we get what Jung called the collective unconscious. And so whatever we build upon needs to be somehow based or somehow reflected on that. And to me, that's the critical question about how we move forward in a way that maintains this consciousness of the past, or do we just cut ourselves off from the past, see the future as a blank slate, and reinvent ourselves however we wish?
And I want to bring up the example of the Kabiroi, the worshippers of Prometheus. They were the metallurgists or mythic metallurgists of ancient Greece. And there's the scene, of course, Prometheus is eventually unbound. And so Prometheus is this symbol of technology and progress. Well, when you unbind Prometheus, you get this idea that technology is now unleashed. There's no limitation. And I think that we feel, Kurzweil's notion of singularity is literally all boundaries are falling apart with technology. Technology is taking away all boundaries of abilities. Well, what happens when Prometheus is finally freed is that Zeus insists he wear a chink of the chain as a ring. And all of his followers, the Kabiroi, the smiths, the technologists of ancient Greece, they also wore this ring. And this ring is to say, okay, we're not bound, but we're supposed to always remember why it's valuable to be limited in yourself. It's a constant reminder of restraint and of the past, even though you're no longer bound. So as we become technologically unbound, there's an increasing demand on the ethics and morality of us as individuals.
I think that's a great way of putting it. And my way of thinking about that is there's no hubris without sacrifice. And unless we figure out a way to make sacrifice, which means to make sacred in its essence. Sacrifice in its essence is about maintaining a sense of the sacred, and in the course of our conversation that might be a loaded word, but it's just another way of talking about maintaining a sense of the archetypal, the divinities that inform our imagination and so forth. So again, no moving forward without taking into account the archetypal background. And at least as Greek mythology would tell us, if we try to do that, if we try to forget the gods will punish us.
Yeah, right.
Well, and of course, I find it fascinating, too, in each one of these episodes, not everyone, but most of them, where man's humanity is questioned and its value in the universe is questioned by whoever the protagonists are in that particular series, and sometimes it's members of their own crew. references are made to, yes, in our past, this is the way that we were, but we have grown beyond that. And there was some truth to that, but it still existed even in that day. There was still jealousy. There was still a certain type of greed and needing to control and have power and so forth by some characters. Yeah. But for the most part, the crew and members of the Federation, for the most part, they were all in that sense benevolent in the
such good people.
They were good. Well, for the most part, they were.
Yeah.
And of course, you had some series where some of the members of the Federation were possessed by other creatures that then tried to overthrow the Federation and so on and so forth. So I think that's real interesting. And you talk about technology. It's funny because I've been wanting to find a way that I could kind of keep an eye on my pets at home. And so I would put a microphone out and I would record the whole day. And then when I get home, I'd stop the recording and I'd go through and I can read it kind of like the
visual of the
exactly.
recording,
And I can say, okay, here's where they were barking and it's quiet. And most of them they were just all quiet throughout the day.
Yeah.
Well, I finally bought a surveillance camera that I can access on the internet.
Oh, cool.
Okay, it's not one of those where you got to go into the router and reset all this stuff. And it's like, okay, now this has opened up a whole new world, not just in terms of seeing them, but going, wait a minute, they're not in the camera shot. Where are they? And it's like, whoa, back up. There's don't have that disconnect. Just because they're not in the camera. Oh,
right. Now that you have the camera, there's the desire to constantly be able to observe.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, fortunately, there's a microphone attached to this camera, so I can listen. And I'll hear them barking occasionally and so forth. But it's almost as though our technology, every time we get a new advancement, we are made to believe that it now is essential.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Cell phones used to be back in the my first one I got in 1998. And I got it because I needed it for business. But before then, I never had one.
Right. Now it seems like one of the most essential pieces of your body.
And there was a great Paul Harvey commentary where he talked about as a child, you used to run out the front door of your home. You didn't have any money in your pockets. You had no wallet, no identification, no keys, no nothing. And you didn't care.
Right.
And as you grew up, you were taught to care.
And you make a world then in your play without all these accoutrements that we have now. But I love the description. It would be interesting to think now, what has that enhanced? Has that brought a greater sense of sense of well-being to my life? Because I think really what the Borg are saying to us, they're asking us how much do we really want to be plugged in? How much do we want to be networked?
They give us the extreme so we can really imagine it.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. It's fascinating. We think that with all this information at our fingertips, that we are more informed. But I would argue that no, we're actually less informed. And I've had conversations with people who grew up in America in the 40s and 50s. And they said, even very working class people would read the newspaper every day and digest the stories.
And those were real articles, too.
They're long articles. So there would be more complex understanding of issues than we have today, where we read these sound bites and skim through the news.
Well, it's way
and
broader.
Everything is prepackaged.
So thin.
Yeah, broader but thin is an interesting way.
Well, you've been working on a book on this content, on the Borg and human hybridization for a few years. What is it that pulls you in the most? Like, what is it about this stuff that is really lighting you up? What's the juice, to give you one of your own words back?
I think it's the feeling that it can be a cliche to think that every era is the turning point or the pivot, because in a sense the future comes out of whatever moment you're standing in. But I really do think we are at a point in which unless we become much more conscious of what makes us essentially human, we're going to go down a track that will take us into some very soulless, if not extremely destructive places. So that's what stands in the back of my mind with these topics.
Now, I don't know if Will has shared with you my musings regarding the Borg and why, for whatever reason, it's come up in my mind so strongly. In my program, throughout the rest of the month, we talk about more spiritual metaphysical constructs. And we talk about the intuition. And again, we start going down the list of names that we've given it over the centuries: the still small voice, the higher self,
Right.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so then I say, okay, well, let's keep going with that. Let's find, okay, where is that voice coming from? All right. And from a more spiritual and maybe even religious perspective, one might say, well, that's God talking to me. That's God speaking to my heart, telling me where I need to go. Do I need to turn left here? Do I need to turn right? And so on and so forth. And, of course, I encourage people to listen to and follow, carry through with what they just heard.
What feels really authentic to
Exactly.
them. Yeah.
So if, on a very simplistic level, if the still small voice is the voice of God, and I'm listening to it, and I'm choosing to follow that voice, and Will does the same, and you do the same, we three will not receive the same messages. However, the information we've received and the guidance that we're given is all interconnected in the big picture, which we can't see. The Borg is the same way, except that there is, at least
Like
initially,
all the voices, they're so interconnected and so interrelated and
exactly.
so complete.
There's no contradiction of message.
Right.
They may have told you, the inner voice may have told you blue, and Will green, and me red, but there's a reason why each of us was given a different color. We don't know what that is because we can't see the big picture. Right. And so when I use the analogy or the example, the myth of the Borg, in the context of spirituality, people got freaked out over the NSA knowing what every thought that we, our cell phones and on and on and on. I'm going, okay, working for a Christian radio station for 15 years, I came to the realization that God already knows all this stuff. So what difference does it make if 7 billion other people know? And besides, most of them don't care anyway. Because the grand universe knows all this stuff, so it's not a secret. It's nothing to...
So transparency, interconnectivity, huge part of the Borg, huge part of our future. How do we feel about this?
It's all natural, in a manner of speaking, on a spiritual level. What do you think about that?
I think the key thing in all of that is the particularity of the intuition or the idea or the vision. There's a paradox around archetypal experience, and that is that a true archetypal experience is an overlap of the universal and the unique. And the best way to think about that is if you go see a film and the filmmaker has tried to use some sort of mythic archetypal structure, the hero's journey or something, and they do it in such an overt way that the whole thing just falls flat. Whereas the quirky film that has the universality underneath it is what is much more powerful. And so I think we have to be a little careful with slapping the divine label on our intuitions, because that can lead to a kind of inflation and absolutizing of our particular intuition. If we're not careful, we'll set up a cult or something around our vision. But if we can look at the vision psychologically or symbolically or the intuitions and begin a process of discernment around that and begin to tune in to where that intuition fits a narrative that's emerging in the culture, for example, I think that's a very fruitful thing to do.
And I think the three of us would tend to agree. We would not care to have anyone come up to us and say, God told me to tell you. Because I've had people do that. And I say, hold it. I am right here. God can call me collect. He knows the number. I'll accept the charges, and I'll take the call. and I'll get the information directly. I do not need you to be telling me. And in that context,
and that's what the Borg does. The Borg are convinced that everybody wants to be Borg, and every Borg believes, resistance is futile. This is the best way to be. Everybody should be assimilated, and it is an absolute shock to the Borgs that are freed. The Borg that are freed from the I don't know what the plural of Borg is, but
that's it.
But the ones that are freed are shocked at this idea that anybody wouldn't want to be assimilated.
Yeah.
Like, isn't this obviously what you would want? And you might say the same thing. Like, what if really wealthy countries think, well, obviously this quote third world country wants our stuff and the things that we can give them. Well, that is. I'm not saying that's not true, but I'm definitely saying that we tend to answer that question from within our own frame.
Well, excuse me, the mass mind is very enticing.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to feel we belong to something. We all want to belong to something larger and more purposeful. And particularly if someone comes along and convinces us they have the truth, they know the meaning, the true meaning of life, the way we need to live, that can be a huge hook.
Certainty is attractive.
Right.
Yeah.
But what depth psychology teaches us is that without being able to preserve our individuality, our uniqueness, in relationship to some sense of collectivity, then the whole thing goes astray. And that's why I like the word community as a way to differentiate from just a mere collectivity or a mere mass, because what a community is a group of individual voices. And the question I think we face today with the internet and being more plugged in is whether that movement towards developing our own uniqueness, our own depth of character, is being enhanced by our exposure and our connectedness, or whether we are in some sense merging into more of a mass-mindedness.
Right, and you see when you look at especially like liberal issues, you'll see a lot of collective response on social medias to certain things. And I remember on the Daily Show there was a homosexual man on there that was actually being very critical of a kind of collective mob that had sought the resignation of a man that worked at a company that followed his own beliefs about, he didn't believe in gay marriage, whatever. And the guy on the show came on the Daily Show was like, you know what, that's inappropriate. This is a man in his private sector doing business. It's not appropriate for some mob mentality to impose their values on this guy. And I think that most of the world feels like we're turning towards more liberal openness towards lots of things. But when that liberal openness towards lots of things becomes a mob mentality that's actually closed, are we really exploring and growing, or are we actually turning more into a singular collective mob?
Yeah.
And another aspect of that, too, is, and we're coming back to the Borg, you go through a couple of episodes and you get to a movie called, I think it's First Contact.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where, I'm going to play a clip from it, where you now have the opposing views on what should be done.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, Picard had been immersed in the Borg culture, I'll call it, in that context. And he came out of it, and he thought he knew exactly how this should be taken care of. And he's confronted by this woman in this particular. I like the movies they're making because I like them. They're episodes. They're just long episodes. They're great. But this is that particular scene.
This is about saving the future of humanity.
Jean-Luc, blow up the damn ship!
No! No! We'll not sacrifice the Enterprise. We've made too many compromises already, too many retreats. They invade our space, and we fall back. They assimilate entire worlds, and we fall back. Not again. The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther. And I will make them pay for what they've done.
And what's interesting to me about that particular scene in the dialogue is the fact that he's drawing a line. He's saying, "This is it.
Right.
I'm drawing the line, and here's where the line is."
Yeah.
Kind of like what we talked about earlier. Who's going to draw the line and where?
Right.
And he doesn't want to destroy his ship.
Right.
Unlike the Vikings of long ago, who would sail in, burn their ships because that would assure them of victory, or at least they hoped. It's like, hey, we can't go home in the ships we came in,
Right.
so we better win.
Wow.
To me, it's interesting how, even as the series progressed, dealing with the Borg, and the mentality of the humans started to shift to. Now, this is sounds kind of strange, I think. I may be using the wrong inappropriately. You have the Borg, and the humans began to, if I'm correct, they started to anthropomorphize the Borg, make them human.
Especially literally Q. They're pulling
Q,
Borg
exactly.
out and making them human, and
Right.
and then there's even the reverse where they send the individual back into the hive, and that individuality infects
Exactly.
the idea that the hive itself. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's really interesting how when we had Zaman last month, and he was sharing with us from an Islamic perspective, and I'm sitting here and I'm just, give me more.
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
I need more. I was not taught this
Right.
Yes.
years ago, even prior to 9/11. I need to know more about, and I hate to use the term, these people, but this philosophy, this belief system, so that I can better understand what's going on in the world today.
Right.
Yeah, the motif that I think about when I think about this moment with Picard is that very often the hero in the story has to be somehow wounded or infected by the very thing that they're fighting against, as if it has to be taken inside in order to be transformed. So he. In a way, had to become Borg in order to then fight the Borg. And I think of the same motif in the first at the end of the first Terminator film. The Linda Hamilton character gets a shard of this Terminator stuck in her leg, and then she goes on to be the key person in the fight against the cyborgs. And in Star Wars, I think Luke lose his hand
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
at
lost
some
his hand.
point, and he
And
has
has
to
an
get
artificial.
a robotic hand. And of course, his father is already one of the
Right.
first cyborg images that
Glad
was
we touched on
entered
Darth
the
Vader.
popular imagination. But it's the same motif. He becomes a little bit robotic. He in order to then be able to fight this sort of titanic monstrosity, and that's a word we haven't used yet. But I really see the Borg as quite parallel to the Titans in Greek mythology.
Can you say some more about that?
Well, the Titans were an earlier race of beings. Sometimes they're called gods, but they existed before what we know as the Olympian gods, and they really represent a very undifferentiated kind of power drive, in contrast to the sort of wonderful archetypal particular of the Greeks.
Harmonic organization of roles.
Exactly, and also what it means to be Titanic is to break all limits. It's the best way to think about it. So when I think of what's Titanic today, I think of the way corporations have become these unwieldy monoliths, and the human factor then gets squeezed out of the picture.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if the motif here is you need to take in a little bit of that world in order to then humanize it, bring it down to size. And what's really dangerous is when that world stays completely autonomous. You know, the Death Star, the Borg,
The Cylon,
because it will become more and more Titanic. There's no human factor entering into the picture. So it's a wonderful metaphor, I think, for the challenge that we face with our relationship to technology. Will we let the technology become Titanic Will we let the corporation dictate the way of life, or will we force the human factor, the humanizing element into the picture?
And this is why I like the character Prometheus so much, because he is a Titan, yet he's also the god of technology. And so while he kind of represents kind of unconscious, undifferentiated, everything that the Titans represent, he also represents, he is the extreme example of intelligence and logic and clarity as well. And so, and he's also the ultimate example of a defender of human rights. You know, Zeus wants to use the technology he's gotten from Hephaestus and Zeus.
Well, he advances human consciousness, and this is the two sides of that Promethean moment. On the one hand, he frees humanity through passing on knowledge, sciences, and so forth. He frees humanity from a kind of unconscious relationship to the gods. But at the same time, there's an incredible danger that comes with that moment. It's the danger of hubris. And I always think it's significant to remember that the name itself, Prometheus, means forethought. So what is Promethean is about what we were talking about a few moments ago, is that mentality that keeps looking ahead, keeps imagining that everything that's necessarily will grow out of this moment and our capacity. Technological solutionism is what the term they now use to describe that mentality in Silicon Valley, versus being able to look back, to value traditional wisdom, because really that's what gives us a sense of limits, a sense of containment around shaping the future.
Yeah. But it doesn't seem that forethought, at least from my perspective, I mean, they think of all of the great things that this technology will do in the future, but they don't seem to run down the possible downsides. I mean, they don't really critically think about what the potential pros and cons are. And I'm not saying that, okay, and so we'll do that, we'll weigh it, and okay. No, we won't do that because the cons are too heavy. I'm just saying that, you know, they it's like, okay, you're going to do this and there's nothing we can do to stop you, but we would at least like to know what the potentials are either way.
That's, to me, that's the critical thing, and it has started to happen in some important places. Even Ray Kurzweil, in his book *The Singularity*, has been forced to acknowledge what he calls the promise and perils of the new genetic nanotechnology, robotic revolution that's coming. So the perils are critical to think of, but what is a little scary is that even in the face of these perils, most of these commentators and technologists are saying, well, we're inevitably going to go there anyway.
Right.
It has a momentum of its own. Another place where it's fascinating is in the development of AI, because we're looking forward to the point of what they call artificial superintelligence, where in some sense human intelligence will be bypassed, and the smarter computers will make more and more smarter computers.
Right.
And there are think tanks now set up to ensure what they call friendly AI.
Good idea.
Because in extrapolating down the line, they really do see the danger of an artificial intelligence that will turn against us. It seems like science fiction, but there's serious scholarly work now being done on this problem of what happens when AI reaches a certain threshold.
I just saw a interview with Larry Page in Charlie Rose on a TED Talk, and he showed a video of an AI system playing all the old video games, and it just cruised through, beating all the old video games like super fast and better than we ever could do. And it's like, yeah, I get that, you know, some kind of creative input has to go to a computer to take over the world or something like that. But if it were to see taking over the world as a video game, there was a movie like that, I think in the 80s, what would stop it? It would be better than us at that. But here's, because we really have to start wrapping up, but there's a point worth making, is that I've heard some people that are really concerned with the future of computers becoming more intelligent than humans. Their big pushback is to say that nothing will ever be more intelligent than the combination of humans and machines. And the creativity and intuition of a human, the questions of a human, and the computing power of a machine.
Well, it really underscores the question of what we understand by intelligence. And a lot of the AI operatives and technologists have a very narrow idea of intelligence. It's all about rational
computing
intelligence. Yes, and that's why the brain-computer analogy is a critical piece of a way of imagining into the future. Yeah. See, already in that analogy, we've reduced the brain to something that is human-made, that can be, as they say, reverse engineered. So to me, a lot of these innovations force us into reclaiming things like emotional intelligence. Imagination.
It shows us what it is to be human when we compare ourselves against computer intelligence.
And that's the little sliver of the upside.
Right.
Yeah. Very interesting. I have to say that Ray Bradbury's laws of robotics probably wouldn't apply. That's science fiction in more ways than one. I want to thank you so much, Glenn, for joining us today. This has been fabulous, and I look forward to having you back again in the future.
Great. I enjoyed it.
Let me remind you about the upcoming talks that are going to be held out at the Ojai Foundation. June 29th, 5:30 p.m. Arthur George will present on the Mythology of Eden, which of course was last month, and a reminder that you can find out more information about what we're talking about in regard to the roundtable at mythosophia.org. That's the roundtable, and go to mythosophia.org, where you can also find recordings of previous broadcasts of Mythosophia here on Tell Me Your Story. Will, thank you again for joining us on the program.
Thanks, Richard.
I'm Richard Dugan. This has been Tell Me Your Story: New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Hope you enjoyed this series. We're going to continue on next month, so please stay with us. I'm Richard Dugan. Until next month, love to Lal.